At my father's second wedding, I realized exactly what I was to him. I was standing in the lobby of the Ritz-Carlton, watching the guests glide past in designer gowns and tuxedos, when the planner handed me a small white card. My name wasn't printed in gold like everyone else's. There were no flourishes, no Miss Sterling, no daughter of the groom, just one word in neat black letters. Housekeeper. I stared at it for a second, thinking it must be a mistake. Before I could ask, Cassandra, my father's new wife, appeared at my shoulder in her $20,000 Vera Wang dress, perfectly made up, perfectly pleased with herself. "Oh, good. You got your badge," she said lightly. "You're just staff here today, Victoria. No chair, no plate, no place at the tables. It's better this way. We don't want guests to be confused." My brother Alexander wandered over, fastening his cufflinks, grin already in place. He looked at my badge and snorted. "Food is for family only," he said, loud enough for the front desk staff to hear. "Try not to mix that up, yeah?" The words should have cut deeper than they did, maybe because some part of me had been waiting my whole life for them to say it out loud. I felt something inside me go very still. I straightened, reached for my hand, slid off the old family ring my grandmother had given me before she died, and walked across the marble floor toward the entrance of the ballroom. My father was inside, laughing with some senator, champagne glass in hand, basking in his own myth. I stopped at the edge of the head table, set the ring down on the linen in front of his place card, and said clearly, "If I'm just staff, then I'm no longer your family." The smiles around me faltered. A murmur rippled through the nearby guests. My father's face went white. Cassandra's mouth tightened. Alexander almost laughed again, but didn't quite manage it. They had no idea that moment was just the opening move. Because while they were busy labeling me housekeeper, I was already quietly controlling 40% of their empire. My name is Victoria Sterling. I'm 32 years old, founder of Nexus Advisory, a consulting firm that, by the time all of this happened, was generating $45 million a year. We rescued mid-sized companies from collapse, fixed their systems, restructured their debts, and gave hundreds of employees their jobs back. My father, Richard Sterling, never quite saw it that way. Victoria's little hobby, he'd call it, whenever anyone asked what I did. He ran Sterling Industries, a logistics and infrastructure conglomerate with a gleaming 45-story tower in downtown San Francisco, 1,200 employees, and $280 million in assets. He liked to tell people he'd built it from nothing, conveniently skipping over my mother's inheritance, my grandparents' investments, and every person he'd crushed along the way. Alexander, the golden child, stepped straight into the family business after college and rose quickly through the ranks. I went to Harvard for my MBA, graduated with distinction, and built Nexus on my own. You'd think that would have earned me some respect. The first real warning sign came at Thanksgiving 2023. 23 relatives crammed around the long mahogany table in my father's Nob Hill mansion. Cassandra at his right hand, Alexander at his left, his kids, their nannies, a few carefully selected friends of the family, who were really just business assets with nicer clothes. Alexander bragged about closing a $50 million acquisition, waving his fork as if he'd personally carried the deal on his back. My father raised his wine glass, beaming. "At least Alexander gives me real value," he said. "Grandchildren and corporate growth. Some people actually contribute to the Sterling legacy. Others just exist on the periphery." His eyes flicked over me as he said it, then away again, like I was a smudge he couldn't quite wipe off the table. I didn't respond. I'd learned years ago that arguing only made him crueler. 2 days later, an email landed in my inbox from Alexander, CCing our father and Cassandra. "Stop pretending your little consulting firm matters. You're embarrassing yourself trying to compete with real corporate work. Maybe focus on finding a husband instead." He had no idea that by then I had already bought 8% of Sterling Industries. Evergreen Holdings LLC, my first shell company, held the shares. I'd purchased them quietly from a board member my father had forced out years earlier, Eleanor Blackwood, widow of his former partner. Richard had destroyed her husband's company in a ruthless takeover. She had been waiting a long time for a way to hit back. She didn't know it was me at first. The sale was anonymous, but she knew exactly the kind of buyer she was hoping for, someone who cared about accountability more than cocktail appearances. The second blow came by accident. In January 2024, I stopped by Sterling Tower to drop off a birthday gift for my father's secretary, Margaret, the only person in that office who'd ever treated me like more than a nuisance. While I waited in the executive conference room, my eyes landed on a folder left near the head chair. Sterling Estate Planning. Confidential. I shouldn't have looked. I did anyway. The new will was dated January 15th, 2024. Every line was a knife. Alexander would inherit 100% of Sterling Industries, all real estate holdings. The family trust valued at $180 million. Cassandra would receive $30 million in cash, the Napa Vineyard, the Tahoe vacation home. Even Alexander's ex-wife was mentioned, with a $2 million education trust for their kids. My name appeared once, in a short paragraph. Victoria Ann Sterling shall receive no portion of the estate, greater than as she has chosen to pursue interests contrary to the family's values greater than, and has failed to contribute meaningfully to the Sterling legacy. Failed to contribute meaningfully. I stood there, hands shaking, reading those words again and again. 8 years of building a company from nothing, countless sleepless nights, hundreds of jobs saved, and in my father's eyes, I had failed to contribute. I took photos of every page with my phone, arranged them back exactly as I'd found them, and went home. I didn't cry. I didn't call him. I didn't send a furious email I'd regret. Instead, I opened my laptop, logged into my 7th shell company, and started buying more shares. If I wasn't family enough to inherit his company, I would simply acquire it piece by piece. By February, the stakes were a lot bigger than bruised feelings. Sterling Industries was finalizing a massive merger with Pinnacle Corp, a $500 million deal that would create one of the largest logistics players on the West Coast. The vote to approve the merger was scheduled for March 18th at the annual shareholders meeting. Alexander was already practicing his speech as incoming CEO of the combined company. He was about to inherit almost $1 billion worth of power. Meanwhile, Nexus Advisory had 3 major clients whose contracts depended on staying in Richard's good graces. If he decided to blacklist us, like he'd done to the last executive who dared walk away from Sterling, we could lose nearly $300 million worth of pipeline in one blow. He'd already done it once. When his former CFO, Thomas Brennan, started his own firm, my father made sure the man never worked with a Fortune 500 company again. Alexander liked to joke that no one leaves Sterling and grows. At a Chamber of Commerce event, I heard him say, loud enough for me to hear across the room, "After the merger, we'll make sure certain consultancies never work in this city again." He raised his glass slightly in my direction. Subtle was not his strength. Then, on February 28th at 11:47 p.m., my phone buzzed with an encrypted email. From Marcus Coleman, Senior Accountant at Sterling Industries. They're destroying evidence. Alexander ordered all physical records of the Meridian Holdings transactions shredded by March 10th. Digital records are being edited. The $15 million they siphoned from the employee pension fund will disappear. I've copied what I can and hidden backups, but if they find out it's me, my daughter's Stanford scholarship is gone, and I'm finished. Please tell me you have a plan. I stared at my screen, then at the wall in front of my desk, covered in sticky notes mapping Sterling Industries' ownership structure, voting bylaws, and shell entities. Yes, I had a plan, but it would cost me everything if it failed. March in San Francisco meant 3 things for the Sterlings: my father's wedding to Cassandra on the 15th, the shareholders' meeting on the 18th, and exactly 72 hours between them. The wedding invitation arrived first. Thick cream paper, calligraphed lettering, the kind of thing that screams money from halfway across the room. 450 guests. Black tie. Ritz-Carlton, March 15th, 4 p.m. Then came the official notice for shareholders. March 18th, 9 a.m. Sterling Tower, 45th floor, Boardroom agenda. Item 1, approval of Pinnacle Corp merger. 3 days between the most humiliating role of my life and the moment I would walk into his boardroom holding the evidence that could destroy him. Not much time for a hostile takeover, but they'd spent 3 decades teaching me how to operate under pressure. The next ping came from Eleanor Blackwood. The March 18th vote will reshape everything. I've convinced 4 other board members to attend in person. They're expecting a dramatic presentation from Alexander. They have no idea what's really coming. Then, another email from Cassandra's wedding planner, confirming my duties. You'll be in the receiving line as household staff coordinator. Please wear a simple black dress, nothing that would distract from the wedding party. You'll manage coat check and assist servers as needed. 5 days before the wedding, I stood at Neiman Marcus while Cassandra and her bridesmaids toiled in front of mirrors. I'd arrived because she insisted all participants attend the final fitting. "We don't need you in photos," she announced once I walked in. "We'll put you near the cloakroom. Just look like staff. Wear something that won't look desperate next to real couture." Alexander lounged in the corner, scrolling his phone, smirking. "Just don't wear anything designer," he added. "It'll look like you're trying too hard." My father emerged from the men's fitting room in his tuxedo, sharp as ever. He gave me a quick up and down glance. "Don't embarrass us by lingering at the main table, Victoria. Blend into the background where you're comfortable." I met his eyes and smiled just slightly. "You're right," I said. "I should know my place." They thought they'd stripped me of dignity. They had no idea they'd simply removed my last reason to be gentle. When I left the boutique, my phone buzzed with a delivery notification. Federal Express. Package from the Securities and Exchange Commission. They had accepted my whistleblower complaint. Their investigator, James Mitchell, would attend the March 18th meeting as an observer. While Cassandra practiced vows in a mirror, I was preparing to put her new surname on the front page of every financial publication in the country. The days leading up to the wedding, my Pacific Heights apartment turned into a war room. 7 laptops, 7 shell companies, Evergreen Holdings, Cascade Ventures, Marina Bay Investments, Golden Gate Capital, Presidio Partners, Sunset Holdings, Bridge Trust. Together, they held 40% of Sterling Industries shares. 5 years of quiet buying, $47 million invested, every percentage point purchased from someone my father had betrayed. Ex-board members, former executives, silent partners, discarded affairs. My lawyer, Jennifer Walsh, sat at my dining table surrounded by binders. "You've built a shareholder block that outvotes the family," she said, flipping through certificates. "He never saw it because you bought from all the people he assumed he'd broken." The briefcase in the center of the room held the real weapon. 3 years of records Marcus had copied and hidden. Bank statements, wire transfers, forged authorizations, security footage. $15 million stolen from employee pensions through a shell company Alexander thought was untraceable. By the time Deloitte's forensic team was done, the number was higher. $23 million, Jennifer said grimly. Once you include offshore accounts, they stole nearly $23 million from their own workers' retirements. We notarized everything, backed it up on encrypted drives, stored copies in 3 different safety deposit boxes and multiple clouds. Then I met Eleanor for tea at the St. Francis Hotel. She sat in the same corner she always did, back straight, pearls at her throat. The picture of controlled rage turned into elegance. "Your father doesn't know I've been helping you," she said, handing me another folder. "He kept me on the board to avoid a lawsuit. That gave me 3 years of emails, strategy documents, and pension committee minutes. Inside were email chains between Richard and Alexander, planning how to silence board members who asked too many questions, how to dilute minority shareholders after the merger, how to reallocate pension funds without triggering suspicion. "Why wait?" I asked. "You could have gone to the press years ago." "Because I was waiting for someone like you," she replied. "Someone with clean hands, patience, and no need to be invited to their parties." She smiled faintly. "Besides, revenge is best served when the entire city is watching. A wedding, a merger, a fall." The night before the wedding, I met Marcus in a parking garage in Soma. He looked like he hadn't slept in weeks. 2,000 pages, he whispered, handing me the briefcase. Every transaction, every forged signature, every late-night access to the pension system. There's even a Zoom recording where Alexander tells his banker to make the pension money disappear before the audit. He swallowed hard. "My lawyer has copies. The FBI has copies. If anything happens to me, this still goes forward." "Your daughter's scholarship?" I asked. "Eleanor guaranteed it," he said. "Full ride, no matter what happens." "They taught you forensic accounting so you'd be useful," I said quietly. "You used it to expose them." He laughed once, humorless. "Alexander created his own destroyer." I locked the briefcase and drove home. In less than 48 hours, I'd walk into my father's boardroom with this evidence. In less than 72, the name Sterling would mean something very different in San Francisco. But first, There was a wedding. March 15th, 2024. The Ritz-Carlton gleamed under a perfect spring sky. 450 guests arrived in black limousines and luxury SUVs. Senators, judges, CEOs, donors. Anyone who mattered in my father's world had been summoned to witness his second youth. My name tag was waiting at the registration table. Victoria, housekeeper. Not Sterling. Not daughter of the groom. Just my first name and my function. The wedding coordinator, eyes flicking nervously between me and Cassandra's instructions, cleared her throat. Mrs. Morgan Sterling requested this, she murmured. You're to stay by the service entrance during the ceremony. No assigned seat for the reception. The staff chief will direct you. The ceremony room was a small cathedral built out of hotel money, white orchids everywhere, gold chairs lined in perfect rows, an aisle that looked like it had been imported from heaven for the afternoon. There was no place card with my name on it. The only spot reserved for me was by the dark drapes near the catering door, where 3 servers in identical black dresses were already waiting. Staff should stay in the service area, Cassandra said as she passed, veil fluttering behind her. We don't want confusion about who's who. She said it loud enough for the federal judge in the front row and the tech billionaire in the second row to hear. Some of them shifted awkwardly. Most didn't react at all. During the vows, my phone buzzed. Eleanor, seated elegantly in the third row, had sent me a photo of my housekeeper tag with 3 words. Evidence. Collected already. The reception made the ceremony look subtle. A ballroom lined with crystal, ice sculptures, centerpieces bigger than most apartments, each table perfectly set, 450 chairs, my place among the servers. When I finally stepped toward the buffet, Alexander appeared out of nowhere, blocking the path. Food is for family, he said again, this time with a smirk wide enough for 3 tables to see. You know that, right, Victoria? Something inside me settled, like a puzzle piece dropping into place. My whole life, they had told me to know my place. In that moment, I realized I did. I pulled out my phone, typed 5 words to Jennifer Walsh, and hit send. Execute project revelation. Full acceleration. Then I waited. When my father clinked his spoon against his glass and stood for his toast, I began to walk. Family, he said, looking radiant under the lights, is about contribution, about adding value. Some people, his gaze found me near the back, badge still on my chest. Some people simply exist on the edges. But today, we celebrate those who truly matter. Applause rippled around the room. Alexander toasted in my direction with his champagne flute, pretending it was all harmless. I kept walking. He was still mid-sentence when I reached the head table. I took off the ring my grandmother had given me when I was 16, the last symbol of any connection to this bloodline, and placed it gently on the white cloth in front of his plate. If I'm just staff, I said calmly, then you're just another company to take over. His face drained of color. Alexander half rose from his chair, but I had already turned away, walking straight out of the ballroom, past the tuxedos and gowns, through the double doors and into the sharp, clean air of the street. As soon as I reached my car, my phone buzzed. Understood, Jennifer wrote. SEC notified, Deloitte deployed, board members confirmed for Monday. All systems go. Behind me, in that glowing hall, they were no doubt mocking my dramatic exit, turning it into another story about unstable Victoria. They had no idea they had 71 hours left of their illusion. March 18th, 2024. The 45th floor boardroom at Sterling Tower was Alexander's kingdom. Floor-to-ceiling glass overlooking the bay, a mahogany table that probably cost more than most people's houses, a 100-inch screen showing his PowerPoint masterpiece, announcing the pinnacle merger. Within 18 months, we'll control... The heavy double doors opened. I walked in, flanked by 5 lawyers from Walsh and Associates, each carrying a briefcase. Conversations died instantly. The laser pointer slipped from Alexander's hand and clattered on the marble floor. "What the hell are you doing here?" he demanded. My father pushed back his chair, face flushing red. "This is a closed session. Security." "I'm here as the designated representative of 40% of Sterling Industries shareholders," I said, handing a bound packet to the nearest board member. "Under Section 7.3 of your bylaws, any shareholder group controlling more than 25% can demand immediate attention from the board." Jennifer connected her laptop to the main screen with a click. Alexander's merger slides vanished, replaced by a clean diagram of Sterling Industries' ownership structure. Evergreen Holdings, 8% Cascade Ventures, 7% Marina Bay Investments, 6% Golden Gate Capital, 5% Presidio Partners, 5% Sunset Holdings, 4% Bridge Trust, 5% arrows from every shell company converged into one name. Victoria A. Sterling, beneficial owner, 40%. That's impossible, Alexander said weakly. You can't. I spent 5 years buying from everyone you discarded, I replied. You taught them how little they meant. I offered them a different story. Eleanor stood up slowly. I move that we pause any vote on the Pinnacle merger until this new shareholder stake is fully addressed, she said. Seconded, came from 2 directions at once. Richard sank back into his chair, eyes wide, mouth slightly open, as if someone had just pulled the floor out from under him. For the first time in my life, I saw him truly stunned. And before we discuss any merger, I continued, walking to the end of the table, there's a more urgent matter the board must see. The screen changed again. Transaction records, bank statements, wire transfers. $23 million, I said, taken from employee pension funds over the last 3 years and funneled into Meridian Holdings, a shell entity controlled by your vice president, Mr. Alexander Sterling. Voices erupted. Board members leaned forward, reading, pointing. These are fabricated, Alexander shouted. You can't just... Every one of these documents has been authenticated by 3 independent forensic teams, Jennifer said evenly. Deloitte, 2 external firms, all of them hired by the board's audit committee after Ms. Sterling filed a whistleblower complaint. Marcus stood up from a chair near the wall, his tie slightly crooked, face pale but steady. I've been documenting these transfers for 3 years, he said. I have original copies. Cancelled checks with your signature, Alexander. Security footage of you accessing the pension system after hours. And a Zoom recording from December where you explicitly told your banker to make the pension money disappear before the audit. James Mitchell from the SEC rose next, badge visible. We've been investigating Sterling Industries quietly for 6 months, he said. Mrs. Sterling's complaint, combined with Mr. Coleman's evidence, was more than enough to open a federal case. At a signal from him, 2 agents stepped into the room. Not security. FBI. Alexander Sterling, one agent said, you are under arrest for embezzlement, securities fraud, wire fraud, and violations of pension protection laws. Alexander looked around wildly. Dad, do something. This is insane. Richard opened his mouth, but no words came out. He watched as the agents cuffed his son in front of the board, the vice presidents, the assistants, the SEC, and his disinherited daughter. The click of the metal in that silent room was louder than any toast at his wedding. You destroyed us, Alexander spat over his shoulder as they led him toward the door. Your own family. No, I said quietly. You destroyed yourself. I just turned the lights on. When the door closed behind him, no one moved for a long moment. Then Eleanor spoke. I move for an immediate vote of no confidence in Richard Sterling as CEO and chairman, effective immediately, she said. Seconded, came from around the table. The vote was fast and brutal. 18 for removal, 3 against, 2 abstentions. In less than a minute, the man who'd built Sterling Industries was stripped of his titles. I further move that we appoint an interim CEO from outside the Sterling family and offer Ms. Victoria Sterling an independent board seat as representative of the 40% shareholder bloc, Eleanor continued. The second vote was almost as quick, 18 in favor. The housekeeper had just become a board member. The legal aftermath hit like an earthquake. Within hours, federal prosecutors unsealed a 47-count indictment against Alexander. Embezzlement, securities fraud, money laundering, conspiracy. Even if he beat half the charges, he'd almost certainly spend over a decade in prison. The SEC slapped Sterling Industries with a massive fine for oversight failures. The Department of Labor opened its own investigation. Class action lawsuits rolled in from employees whose pensions had been raided. I spent the afternoon not celebrating, but negotiating. Every cent stolen goes back, I told the interim CEO and the employee committee in a closed-door session. With interest. Restoring those pensions is non-negotiable. They argued. They panicked. They talked about stock prices, public image, investor confidence. Your reputation is already gone, I said. All you have left is what you do now. By the end of the week, The first $10 million had been returned to the pension fund. The rest would be repaid over the next 90 days, monitored by federal auditors. Marcus was offered the role of chief financial officer. The board needed someone they could trust. "You could be CEO," he told me quietly one evening. "The board would back you. You just took down the family that owned this place." "I don't want their empire," I said. "I just wanted my dignity back, and their employees' futures protected." The fall of the Sterlings rippled through every part of their lives. Cassandra filed for divorce within 48 hours, sobbing on courthouse steps that she had no idea what had really been going on. Unfortunately for her, the ironclad prenup she'd signed to protect the family assets now protected those frozen assets from her. She left with what she'd brought in, a failed modeling brand and debt. Alexander's wife filed for sole custody of their children. His name disappeared from charity boards, country club lists, gala invitations. The man who had always been sure he'd die honored now sat in a detention center waiting for trial. Bail denied as a flight risk. My father retreated to his mansion, now stripped of most staff, his art collection and yacht under review as possible forfeitable assets. The phone stopped ringing. The invitations stopped arriving. One afternoon, a letter arrived at my office, hand-delivered. "Victoria, I know you won't respond, but I need you to know I'm sorry. I see now what I refused to see. You were the only one with real strength and integrity. I was so blinded by my own ego that I pushed away the child who truly inherited my business mind. I don't ask for forgiveness. I just wanted you to know. I read it once, handed it to Jennifer, and told her to file it. Apologies without change are just another form of manipulation. I was done being manipulated. The business world reacted in its own way. The story made headlines. The housekeeper who cleaned house became the Wall Street Journal tagline. They ran a long piece on how I'd spent 5 years quietly acquiring a controlling block, working with disgruntled shareholders and whistleblowers to take down a corrupt dynasty from the inside. 3 Fortune 500 CEOs called Nexus Advisory in the first 2 weeks after the story broke. "If you can uncover that kind of fraud at Sterling," one of them said, "we want you reviewing our books before someone else does." Our revenue tripled within a quarter. We hired 50 new consultants. For the first time, Nexus was not Victoria's little hobby in anyone's mouth. It was a force. Harvard Business School asked to turn the Sterling takedown into a case study. "It's a perfect example of shareholder activism and corporate governance," the dean said over Zoom. "You didn't just expose corruption, you rebalanced power." Meanwhile, Sterling Industries, under Marcus's financial leadership and a new CEO, overhauled its internal systems. They created an anonymous whistleblower line that bypassed management. Integrity Day became an annual internal event where they told the story of how close they had come to losing everything. In the lobby, employees installed a plaque to Victoria A. Sterling, the board member who saved our retirement. It was signed by hundreds of employees. My family's attempts to get back into my life came in waves. Richard's long, rambling emails, Alexander's urgent letters from detention, urging me to reconsider my testimony in the name of family. Cassandra's ridiculous Instagram posts about women supporting women, where she tagged me as if we were old friends. I put up walls, not angry, screaming walls. Legal, clear, unshakable boundaries. All communication from them or on their behalf had to go through my lawyer. Any surprise visits would be treated as harassment. I blocked their numbers, their social accounts, their email addresses. Cassandra tried showing up at my office building once, in huge sunglasses, telling security she was my stepmother, and it was a family emergency. The security footage went straight to the judge, and a restraining order followed. Therapy helped me see just how deep the damage had gone. How many years I'd spent trying to earn approval that was never available. How much of my success had been fueled by the need to prove I wasn't what they said I was. I stopped wanting them to see me. I focused instead on allowing more of the people who had seen me all along. My team at Nexus. Marcus, who risked everything to tell the truth. Jennifer, who protected me with the law I once feared. Eleanor, who had waited years for the right person to stand beside. They became my real family. 6 months after Alexander's arrest, Nexus Advisory announced its IPO. Our valuation? $500 million, More than Sterling Industries, now weighed down by fines, repayments, and the loss of its myth. I created the Sterling Foundation with $50 million of my own money, not to honor my father, but to reclaim our name. Its mission? To fund MBA scholarships for women who had been told they weren't enough. The first full-ride scholarship went to Marcus's daughter. My personal life, for the first time, felt calm. I got engaged quietly to David Chen, a man who'd been there through the worst of it, never trying to rescue me, just standing steady while I rescued myself. We celebrated Thanksgiving 2024 in my home in Marin County. Nothing like the Nob Hill mansion, smaller, warmer, filled with people who genuinely wanted to be there. My team, their partners, Marcus and his daughter, Eleanor, our lawyer and her wife, my fiancé, 20-something people, no assigned hierarchy, no periphery. We ate too much, burned one pie, laughed until we cried. David raised his glass. To Victoria, he said, who showed us that sometimes the best way to clean house is to build a better one. Looking back on everything, the wedding badge, the ring on the table, the boardroom, the handcuffs, I don't feel rage anymore. I feel clarity. I spent 32 years trying to earn a place at a table that was never meant for me, chasing love that came with conditions, accepting scraps of respect in exchange for silence. They liked to talk about the sterling silver spoon, but their values were never silver. They tarnished under the slightest pressure, needed constant polishing, constant lying, constant performance. I ended up being something else entirely, stainless steel. Not as shiny, not as glamorous, but resilient, hard to bend, almost impossible to break. It doesn't need polishing to keep its worth. It just works. The ring I left on my father's wedding table, the one my grandmother had worn for 4 generations. I never took it back. When his lawyer tried to send it, claiming it was rightfully mine as the eldest daughter, I had it auctioned. $30,000 went to a women's shelter. That ring finally did some good when it was no longer in Sterling hands. So here I am. I'm still Victoria Sterling. I'm still the woman they once labeled housekeeper at my own father's wedding. But when I call myself that now, it's with a different meaning. I cleaned house. Not out of spite, not for petty revenge, but to make sure truth, integrity, and hundreds of ordinary employees got what they deserved. If you've ever been the one pushed to the edge of the family photo, the one used as a cautionary tale, the one told you don't really contribute, hear this. Your worth is not decided by people who refuse to see it. You are allowed to walk away. You are allowed to protect your work and your peace. You are allowed to build a life where you don't have to beg to be invited in. We don't choose the families we're born into, but we absolutely choose the family we build. And if you're hearing my story somewhere across the world, sitting in a room you pay for with money you earned in a life you're trying to fix, I'd love to know, where are you listening from? Because I have a feeling there are a lot more housekeepers out there, quietly learning they were never the ones who needed to be ashamed.